Hello, everybody. Welcome to Torn Book Club. I am your friendly host, Saruman, also known as Josh. Pardon me. And we are now on, what is this, episode 6, I think? Um, as always, as people are entering the chat, uh, there's a little confusion of how to get your screen name to reflect something other than Ustreamer and a huge string of numbers behind it. The easiest way to do that is to type /Nick space the name that you want and then hit enter, and that should change it for you. And there, I Stole the One Ring just told you exactly how to do it. If you're having trouble with the chat on theonering.net/live, there is a button on there that says Ustream, and if you click that, it'll take you directly to the Ustream channel, and things work a little bit better there if you're having trouble. So we have a big episode this week. We will be talking about The Desolation of Smaug. Again, this is the second week in a row we're talking about it. I realize that this is a book show, and we're talking about a movie for 2 weeks in a row. But this is also an adaptation. This is a very special movie. It's an adaptation of a book that I think we all know and love, and I want to give it the attention that it really deserves. So last week was our non-spoilery review. This week, since the movie actually came out officially on Friday, most people I think will have seen it at this point, so we're going to have the spoilery review, where the muzzle is off and we're going to be talking about all the little details in the movie, all the spoilers, all the changes, everything. So if you still haven't seen the movie, I'm going to have a little prompt in the window that will say we're doing spoilers right now. Let me bring it up so you can see it. It's going to look like this. Spoilers. Really, that's all it needs to say. And as long as that is up, we will be talking spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, probably best to mute the stream at that point and maybe navigate away from the chat, because there may be spoilers in the chat as well. And then as soon as that, you check in every once in a while and see if that little spoiler window is still up. And once it's not, we are no longer talking about the spoilers of The Desolation of Smaug. So, but before we get into all of that good stuff, I wanted to first give a very big thank you to Justin at TheOneRing.net, because he did something very unexpected earlier this week. On Wednesday, I made a little post on Facebook saying I would say, God, I would love it if the Facebook page for Torn Book Club could get up to 100 likes by the opening day of Desolation of Smaug, which was 2 days from then, and I was at 98 likes. So I figured, hey, I can get 2 friends to like this page. Overnight, Justin went and posted it to Torn's Facebook page, and after that, it was up to 300 likes. And then it kept going, and we finally topped out yesterday at about 547. So we went way beyond what I was expecting or even hoping for. So I want to give a big thank you to Justin for boosting the signal the way he did and bringing in a whole new audience here. So yes, Jackson Murdered It is asking spoilers. There will be spoilers. We haven't gotten to it yet. When I do, we're going to have the a little window in the corner saying when we're talking about spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet, then best not to watch at that point. So, but we're not at that point yet. So don't worry, we're not talking spoilers just yet. So as always, we have our little things that we do here at Torn Book Club. Little reminders every week. The first one is for our book of the month for December, which is a very simple. It's a very easy read. It is The Letters from Father Christmas by J.R.R. Tolkien. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle. It's not that expensive. It's a very quick, very easy read. I figured it really sort of fit the bill for Christmas, Tolkien, easy to read so that we don't have a whole lot to distract us while we're going to see the movies, while we're doing Christmas shopping, going to Christmas parties, getting together with the family. December is generally a very busy month, so this was a very easy read that sort of fit the bill for everything. And I have no idea what we'll do for next year. I'll come up with something by then. Farmer Giles of Ham is an excellent suggestion, and that's going to be a future book of the month at some point. Don't worry. Again, that's another very easy read. And also we have our Rewrite Tolkien contest, which has been going on for a few months, which is our fun writing exercise for Torn fans and Tolkien fans to try to re-envision what Middle-earth and The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings might have sounded like had it been written by another famous author. And no disrespect to Tolkien in any way. We love his work. We love everything he does. This is simply a fun writing exercise for people, something fun and different we can all do together. And this month in December, since it is December, it is Christmas, we're doing Rewrite Pieces of The Hobbit in the style of Charles Dickens, which sounds like a tall order, but could be a lot of fun if you feel so inclined to do it. We do have here are the rules for Rewrite Tolkien. Ah, that's not it. That's for later. Ah, help. What happened? Okay, so our yes, Jackson Murdered It. Smith of Wotton Major is another good one. They'll all be in there at some point. We can only do one per month. Don't worry. So our rules for Rewrite Tolkien are it needs to be 500 to 2,000 words. You can email it to rewrite_Tolkien_contest at TheOneRing.net. Make sure that it's in the body of the email and not an attachment. And give us your full name and your location so that we can credit you properly if you do win. And there's only one submission per contestant. Please do not post it on any of the message boards or in social networking. And if you do win, please do not submit again for another 12 months to give other people a chance to win. So that is the book of the month and Rewrite Tolkien. Those are our things that we do every month, our little reminders. So so we're going to be going into our Desolation of Smaug spoiler talk later. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about some things that have been going on the website since we started posting our reviews of the Desolation of Smaug last week. Most sites have one review of the Desolation of Smaug going up there. Right now, TheOneRing.net, we've got 5, and mine is one of them. And they've kind of run the gamut from very glowing to completely eviscerating the movie. and that's as it should be. This is a movie that is definitely going to cause a rift among Tolkien fans, those who like all the changes and those who can't stand the changes. And both, I feel, are valid opinions. Um, I don't I don't feel that there was and me personally, I loved The Desolation of Smaug. I thought it was a fantastic movie. As an adaptation of Tolkien, I felt didn't really do everything I wanted it to do. As a movie on its own, I thought it was fantastic. Um, but there were a lot of comments from people, and there was one that kind of stuck in my craw a little bit, and I wanted to address that. And that was one person started accusing us of being shills for Warner Brothers and Peter Jackson, and for not standing up for real Tolkien fans. And I take issue with that because that is, if you don't like the movie, that's fine. If you don't like what was done with it, that's fine. You're absolutely entitled to your opinion. Um, what I don't what I don't like is when people see somebody with a different opinion than theirs and quickly go into a very a very negative character assessment of the person whose opinion they don't agree with. And for for one thing, let me just say right away, none of us have received any money from anybody for anything. This is all volunteer, none of us get paid, and we're all just here for the love of Tolkien, and we talk over and over again about how much we love it. Um, and most of us did really enjoy the movie. There are a few who didn't. Um, and their opinions are just as valid. I may not agree with all of them, but they're just as valid. Um, and so, and I don't have any problem with somebody disagreeing um, with one's opinion about the movie. What I don't like is when people say, "Well, then you're obviously a shill, or you're obviously not a real fan." That's when I have a problem, because we're all fans. As far as I'm concerned, if you like something, if you see something and you like it enough to see it again or to learn a little bit more about it, you're a fan. You're in. That's all it takes. Beyond that, I don't really subscribe to this whole idea of you're only a fan if you achieve this specific level of knowledge about it, because most people can't. And Jackson murdered it. People don't understand. Adaptation is implicitly understood. I'm going to make fun of the screw ups. Well, absolutely. There are plenty of things to make fun of. And yes, there are. I did mention that there are disparaging reviews on Torn as well. And Ostadan, he put up a review, and actually, initially he just emailed that review to Torn staff and didn't want to put it up because he was afraid that he was gonna get torn a new one by all the fans online. And we encouraged him, take this review, refine it, uh, make it make it look professional, because at the beginning it was just a collection of thoughts. Um, but make a real review out of it, and let's post it, and let's show this diversity of opinion. And he brings up some interesting points. He also brings up some points I don't particularly agree with, but it's still a valid opinion. And there's going to be, I think, a lot of very differing opinions over this movie because it does stray so far afield from the original text. And uh, and yes, so Jackson murdered it. It's pretty obvious where you stand here, just from your screen name alone. Uh, but yeah, I don't like the whole idea of if you don't agree with me, then there's clearly something wrong with you as a person, uh, and that's where I draw the line when it comes to criticism. Uh, let's see here. Ustreamer 16. I don't think adaptation is implicitly understood. I think people expect a completely faithful translation from book to film. That would not be an adaptation. Well, there are some cases where that can work and some where it can't. And I'll get into that much later when we talk about what constitutes a good or a bad adaptation. Uh, and yeah, I don't mind if, like, I Stole the One Ring says, and I don't mind people not liking it, but my opinion won't change, and nor should it. Your opinion is your own, and not everybody's going to agree, particularly on this movie, and maybe very vocally are not going to agree with each other about it. And that's perfectly fine. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where I stand here. If you don't agree with one with an opinion on the movie, that's perfectly fine. There's no need to then resort to name calling or accusing the other person of being in the pocket of the studio or something like that because they dared to like this movie. Um, because that helps nobody. That really helps nobody. Um, so, with that said, um, my own review of the Desolation of Smaug was overall very positive, and really that was because I was trying to keep spoilers to a minimum in it, so I was speaking mostly in generalities. And generally speaking, I really enjoyed this movie. But when we get down to certain specific things, and that requires getting into the spoilers, there are things that I did have a problem with. And we're going to start going over all of that right now. Okay, the chat is going wild over here with everybody. So I apologize if I missed something, but I'm going to keep pressing ahead. Um, let's see. Eva says we can always read the book if we want the original story. Sure, we can. Or, you know, we can watch the Rankin Bass animated Hobbit movie. That was a pretty faithful adaptation. It just the only two things it removed were Beorn and the Arkenstone. Other than that, just about everything else is there. So, with that said, let's go into the more spoilery parts of The Hobbit: The Desolation of Smaug. So, this will be the point now where if you haven't seen the movie, you should mute your stream, and you should probably navigate away from the chat and just check in every once in a while and see if this spoilers tag is still up. If it is, then we're still talking spoilers. If it isn't, then you can rejoin. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, or a few seconds to do that, because we don't want to just sit here doing nothing. And so, yeah, there we go. Now now I feel we're fairly safe. So let's begin the spoiler talk. So, as I said, generally speaking, I loved this movie. I thought it was a thrill ride. I thought it was very well paced. I thought the effects were fantastic. I thought the action was fantastic. I thought the acting was fantastic. Um, generally speaking, I thought this was a wonderful movie. When we get into specifics, when we get into spoiler territory, then we start to uncover some of the things that I personally didn't like or wish they had done a little differently. Um, and so one of these is uh, oh, did you know Jackson Murray said, did you know the Rankin Bass had the Arkenstone in it and they were removed by Warner Video when it was finally released? I didn't know that, as a matter of fact. Um, that's interesting. I didn't realize that the Arkenstone was in there and then was later removed. Um, I'm gonna have to look that up. I had no idea about that. So, so the first thing that I want to talk about that I personally didn't like or wish they had done differently in this was let's just bring it up real quick. Was where is he? Where is he? Here he is. Was Beorn. Uh, I was. I have to say I was fairly disappointed with Beorn here. Um, because there wasn't enough of him, and I didn't feel that his scene was very strong. In the book, of course, his scene is much more lighthearted. It's much more whimsical, and in this, he's very dark. He talks a lot about how his people were captured and tortured by Azog and his orcs, and we even see that he's still wearing the manacle from his slave days. Um, but Beorn came off as a very much more forbidding character and a much angrier character. And yes, he is a very angry character in the book. He's also somebody who tend he sort of distances himself from everything. Um, I I was hoping for more with Beorn. I don't know if we needed to go like full whimsical with the animals serving the food, although that would have been cool to see. Um, but I was hoping for a scene that was much meatier with him. Um, and who knows? Maybe we'll get more in the extended edition. But like as far as I'm concerned, it didn't quite do what I was hoping it would. Uh, and And yes, Ustreamer70 is saying relaxing or taking a break doesn't read very well on film, uh, and that's true. And I think I mean it's nice, especially in such a fast-paced adventure, for everybody to take a break once in a while and just sort of regroup. And had this all been in a different structure, um, then it would have then that would have made more sense. Now that Bjorn is at the beginning of the second movie, it's kind of hard to start the movie with, "Hey, let's all take a break." Um, okay, Sexy Hobbit is asking, "Did you make sure that Torn Book Club will be saved and uploaded to YouTube later?" Um, Justin is the one who is taking care of uploading it to YouTube, but what I am doing is I'm making Ustream archives of this that will be available immediately after the show is done, and I will post links to that in the Facebook page as soon as it's up. So yeah, don't yeah. So this will be up there as soon as we're done, which I have no idea when we'll finish. Hopefully, it won't be extraordinarily long, but there's a lot to get through. Um, so back to other things I didn't like. And this was one thing that I really couldn't talk about last week because it was very spoilery. And this was something that I mentioned in the comments of my review as something we didn't was not what we were expecting, and I sort of downplayed how disappointing it was to me. But um, what I this is something that I found extremely disappointing in the movie, and that is the character of Bulk. Um, I was I was very disappointed with Bulk for a number of reasons. Um, one of them being essentially what happened in this movie was he pretty much just switches places with Azog, and Azog needs to stay in Dol Guldur, and so he hands off his chase down Thorin quest to Bolg, and Bolg pretty much just picks up exactly where Azog left off, and pretty much you could have swapped the two of them out, and there would have been no difference. Let alone do we have anything. Let alone do we have anything that really that really shows us that Bolg is in fact Azog's son. Like, that is not telegraphed at all. But the biggest disappointment with Bolg for me was that there was a much deeper problem with him, which stems from there was a very different looking Bolg that was originally filmed, and he was a much cooler looking character, and he would have been the one chasing the dwarves from the get go, um, and he was a live actor, in costume. It was all practical effects, and there have been images of him for there have been images of him going up on the internet. It was up on the documentaries. They had action figures of him. They had him on posters even, and then the CG Azog and the CG Bulk that we saw were a last minute replacement, and I'm still not entirely sure why. Um, but what we see, but I do have an image of what the original Bolg was going to look like, and this is it. And he was going to be played by Conan Stevens, who you might know from uh, Game of Thrones. He played Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, and he was done up in this amazing makeup, and and he had a very intimidating weapon. This is the kind of Bolg that I could see mortally wounding Thorin in the Battle of Five Armies. And that's what makes this Bolg so disappointing, because we got that instead of this amazing looking orc that we saw. And so I was that's what I found so disappointing with him, and that's probably one of my biggest gripes with this movie, is that we had this really amazing looking Bolg that a lot of effort obviously went into, that was replaced at the last minute by decent looking CG. I won't even say good CG. I won't say bad CG. It was just okay. Um, yeah. So so yeah, that's kind of where I stand on Bulk. Now, I did talk a little bit about, again, generalities with about the controversial character of Tauriel, and as I expected, um, once the movie came out, there was going to be a very strong love her, hate her camp. And I fall strongly into the love her camp. I thought that Tauriel, as a character, even though she was created entirely for the for the movie and is not in the book at all. Um, there was what was I going to say? Oh, my mind totally blanked. Uh, I I thought she blended in very seamlessly. I thought she was a really strong character, and she was a strong female character, the type of which we don't see very often. Uh, yeah, uh, Pedro Fernandez. I liked Tariel, but hated the romance with Keeley, and that is something I want to get into, and that's something I obviously couldn't talk about last week. Was this this quote unquote love triangle that was going on between Tariel, Keeley, and Legolas. Um, I it's hard for me to describe because in many aspects I hate love triangles in just about anything. Um, I think they're unnecessary. They're very predictable plot devices. They can only end like in maybe just a very few selected obvious sorts of ways. Um, Usually, most dramatically, with one of them dying. Um, what I will say, however, with this love triangle, which I did like, was that it was downplayed. Like, they didn't spend a lot of time on it. They spent some time on it, more than I probably would have liked. But there was it. It didn't overtake or overshadow the plot. Uh, how is it that a Sylvan elf whose people haven't seen the light of Valinor can heal mortal wounds? Not even Gandalf has that power. Well, you know, to be fair, Keeley was not dying from a Morgul wound. He was dying from some orc poison, which is probably not as powerful as a Morgul blade. Why it needed the exact same technique to be healed, I don't know. That that's something else. Um, but I will say, I thought what I liked about this romance, and there was much I didn't like about it. What I did like about it was that Tauriel seemed uncomfortable with the entire thing, and that I did like. Um, when Thranduil tells her that Legolas is very fond of her, you can see her get very uncomfortable about it, and maybe it's because she returns his feelings and knows that she can't be with him. Maybe it's because she doesn't feel that way and she doesn't know how to let him down easy, but obviously this is something she doesn't want to deal with. This is something she doesn't want to talk about. And there are clearly other things going on that concern her much more. Um, did did you hear the music Howard Shore created for this part of the movie? Yes, I did. I had the soundtrack, and I thought his score was much better this time around than in Unexpected Journey. Um, there are a lot of repeated themes, but there's a lot of new cool themes that I really liked. Um, and yes, the King's Foil theme is definitely one of them. Now, one last thing I want to talk about with this romance is when Tauriel does heal Keeley, he, in a delirious state, starts talking about Tauriel and not realizing that she's actually there with him. He thinks it's her, but he's not entirely sure. And it's an okay, sweet scene, but what I liked about it was when she sees that he's talking about her in some very dramatic romantic terms, she looks very uneasy. And And what I like about that is that, and they do the same thing in the Hunger Games, which is the girl who is obviously like sort of in this tug of war between two guys does not like the fact that this is happening. And I think that's a much more realistic way of it as opposed to like in the the movie series that shall not be named, Twilight, where she basically manipulates both of them, which I thought was awful. Uh, so, and Jackson murdered it. So, how about turning Bard into a smuggler instead of captain of the guard of Lake Town? Yeah, that was an interesting turn, um, and I'm not sure. Uh, uh, I don't I don't fully agree that it took every shred of nobility that character had and threw it out the window, as you're saying, Jackson. Um, what it did was it painted him in a very different color, which, again, yes, and like you said, it was Faramir all over again. And yes, they did the same thing with Faramir. And this is one of those subjective things where it's like, does it improve the character? Does it make him more interesting? Or does it ruin the character entirely? And I'll be honest, I really can't tell either way. Like it could go either way for me. I liked Bard in the book. I liked him in the movie, even though they're two very different characters. Um, I it it's hard for me to really say like this was right, this was wrong, because this was a very subjective change, and I felt that it may have. I don't feel it harmed the movie overall and seemed to work with how the movie was. And Jackson has always had this sort of. Jackson has always had this kind of need to have his hero characters be kind of underdogs. He did the same thing with Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, where throughout the entire movie he's struggling with whether or not he's willing to accept his role as the king of Gondor, as opposed to in the book where he's already gone through that struggle and come out the other end, and he's ready to become king, and he's just biding his time and waiting for the right opportunity to do so. Um, and so it's kind of hard to really like say that that ruined the character, because I felt it made Aragorn a much more dynamic and interesting character in the movies. Um, and I also felt that Bard in this was a very dynamic and interesting character. Um, and would it had would he have been just as dynamic and interesting had they kept him closer to how he was in the book? It's certainly possible. It's not outside the realm of possibility. Um, but for me, I liked him. I thought he was fine. So let's just see here. Do you think the film has the potential to win or be nominated for any Academy Awards? This one, it's not looking good. Like, I'll I'll be honest, and we're actually having this discussion among the Torn staff right now as to how well this movie will do Academy Awards wise, and it's not looking good. Um, it might get a couple technical awards, or at least some nominations, but it's going to be mostly technical stuff. I'm hoping that Howard Shore gets nominated for score for this one, because um, this was a real return to form for him, and whereas the last movie I felt his score was kind of just regurgitating a lot of the old themes, this one created a lot of new ones and a lot of really good ones that I haven't I haven't heard before in these types of movies that I thought worked very well. And I hope that he'll at least get a nomination. But for some of the bigger awards, I don't see Desolation of Smaug getting a lot. Um, Jackson is saying, hope Cumberbatch gets nominated for Smaug. Yeah, I thought he did great, but I also thought Andy Serkis did a great job as Gollum, and he never got nominated either. So odds are not high. Uh, Ustreamer 33, I think Martin Freeman definitely deserves an award for his performance, although he definitely deserved more screen time. Yes, on both accounts. Um, I thought Martin Freeman has been absolutely fantastic this entire time, and there wasn't enough of him in this movie, especially since the movie is called The Hobbit. Uh, at least Gollum got to be a host. He got to be a guest presenter on the MTV Movie Awards. Let's be honest here. And or was Gollum in the Academy Awards at some point? It's possible. I don't know. I don't normally like when the Academy Awards are happening, especially like in Lord of the Rings or Hobbit time. I'm working at the Torrent Oscar party and don't have a lot of time to actually watch the ceremony. I just listen for the applause, then I know whether or not we've won something. Uh, so is anyone else a little peeved at the spider scene about the spider scenes that could have been Bilbo's moment to shine? I I actually I thought the spider scenes were good. I didn't think that it quite made Bilbo out to be the hero that he should have been in that scene. Um, and I understand what Jackson was going for in that scene, like trying to play up Bilbo losing control by being corrupted by the ring. But have but with that, it sort of becomes too much too soon with that. And then yes, the elves come and save the day. And yeah, that uh, yeah, I thought the elves rescuing them from the spiders was unnecessary because it doesn't just make Bilbo look like he's incapable of fighting them. It makes it look like all of the dwarves are incapable of fighting them. And and yes, Ustreamer99, that uh, was talking about how we don't hear the spiders talk until Bilbo puts on the ring, and I thought that was a magnificent touch, and I thought that worked incredibly well. Um, yes, Ustreamer33, Jackson is making too much of an emphasis on how the ring is affecting Bilbo way too early on, don't you think? Uh, I absolutely agree. Like particularly in the spider scene when Bilbo goes into a berserker rage and kills a spider and then almost throws up when he realizes what he's done. Because basically, if he's getting that corrupted by the ring this soon after finding it, then by the time we get to Fellowship, he should pretty much be freaking Gollum at that point. If that's the rate of corruption we're taking. Um, so yeah, I didn't particularly care for that. I realized what Jackson was going for, but I thought it could have been done in a much more subtle way. I thought it would have been. Yes, you're absolutely right, Jackson. The ring didn't start to affect Bilbo until long after he got home. Yes, that's absolutely true. And and I totally understand. Again, I said I understand what Peter Jackson was going for. Um, well, okay, it wasn't a spider. I think it was like a spider larva or something like that. Um, but or maybe it was some sort of centipede thing, but it looked enough like a spider that I thought it was like maybe a larva or a baby spider or something like that. But regardless, we still have Bilbo. Um, we still have Bilbo going into this rage against it because it gets close to the ring after he loses it. And uh, let's see, Ustreamer70 is saying, in the context of the story, I think it's okay that Bilbo is affected by the ring because Sauron is waking up. Well, that's not an invalid point, but I feel this is again. I feel like Sauron. This is another thing that I almost. I almost feel that Sauron had too much power in this, um, especially for for how long it takes for him to regain his strength in Fellowship. If Pedro is saying the creature felt like a centipede to me, it could be. I could be wrong that I could be wrong with that. Yeah, I don't know. your your guess is as good as mine. um, so yeah, I felt like in this, and okay, we can move into Dol Guldur now. I felt like Sauron had regained too much power at this point. Um, let's see, I'm trying to see this chat here. Well, understand some people think it was too early for him to get affected by the ring because he is a hobbit. But it did fit with the story, so he didn't use it with Smaug during the entire scene. Well, okay, I'm going to get into that in a little bit, because that's another thing I have a little bit of a problem with. But let's talk about Sauron and Dol Guldur for a bit. Now, I admit that a lot of what happened at Dol Guldur with the Necromancer is not told very specifically or in great detail, and so there's a lot of room for creativity and a lot of room for playing with what happens there. But I felt that Sauron was too powerful, if that makes any sense. I also thought that he revealed himself too early, because this throws a lot of things into question. Because if Gandalf seemed to know even before he got to Dol Guldur that this had to be Sauron, and that was because he went to the High Fells and investigated the tombs of the Nazgul and quickly deduced that only one person or only one being could revive the Nazgul, and that's Sauron. And so he already knew. So we have this dramatic reveal of the Necromancer as Sauron, and it sort of loses all dramatic impact when you have Gandalf pretty much saying, since the last movie, Gandalf and Radagast both saying, since Unexpected Journey, this is obviously Sauron who is taking over Dol Guldur. Gandalf fighting Sauron incarnate as the Necromancer, was that in the book or the appendices? I don't believe it's in either. And this was one thing that Ostadan brought up in his review. And he is a much bigger authority on this sort of thing than I am, so I sort of defer to his knowledge. But this goes into the kinds of beings that Sauron and Gandalf are. They are Maiar, which are sort of the second level of gods. They can walk on Middle Earth but they're also very powerful. But apparently there is a restriction where two Maiar are not allowed to compete against each other power for power. Of course, you have that's been done before between Gandalf and Saruman, um, and it was done here with Gandalf and Sauron. Now, whether or not that's actually true, uh, or whether or not like a Maiar fighting another one power for power is something that they can't do, I can't say for sure. But Ostadan seems very sure that that is something that they're not allowed to do. Um, and so did you know that the Arkenstone was originally hinted at that it was a Silmaril? Um, I didn't realize that it was hinted at that, but it does explain a lot, and I always kind of assumed so. Um, but that's just me. And um, yeah, I always just sort of assumed that the Arkenstone may have been a Silmaril, and like I brought that up with some of my friends before, and they said, "Oh no, it's not a Silmaril. You're crazy." But you know, it could be. It very well could be, and it certainly would. It certainly would explain Thranduil's motivation. Um, so, um, I did. Did I know that the Balrogs were Maya? Um, I believe I did, because well, um, they're from they're servants of Morgoth, which is the true god of all evil. And so it would make sense that Balrogs would be Maiar, and and again, like Gandalf's confrontation with the Balrog is never really a power for power type of confrontation. He smashes a bridge and has him fall into a pit. Okay. Okay. So yeah, we're the chat is going furiously right now, so I'm just catching up here a little bit. Silmarils were created in Valinor. Dwarves couldn't have mined it in Erebor. Well, like that's a good point, but the Silmarils were also hidden, uh, and they were hidden for a very long time. It's certainly possible that one of the Silmarils got buried deep under a mountain. Um, but again, it's all speculation, um, and again, it's never revealed fully or said in so many words that this is in fact a Silmaril. Whether or not Jackson will just go ahead and flat out say that in the next movie, I don't know. I'm kind of hoping not, just because I like that air of mystery with the Arkenstone, and I'd rather it remain a mystery rather than like reveal. Well, this is what it actually is. Kind of like I hate to say this, but you know, it's that would be almost as disappointing as say midi-chlorians in the Star Wars prequels, where you take this thing that is very mysterious and ground it down to something that's much more practical. Now, I realize the Silmarils are very magical things. They contain the light of Valinor. They were created in the First Age. Um, and so it's not quite as bad as midi-chlorians, but at the same time, it still puts a uh, it still like gives it more context than I would want it to have. Jackson is saying, remember the Silmarils were cast into Middle Earth and most were lost. This is true. And so, like I said, they were hidden, they were cast, they could be veritably anywhere. So yeah, I'm sorry. We've been talking about the Arkenstone possibly being a Silmaril for quite a while now. It's a speculation. It's something I hope is not stated outright in the third movie, but we'll have to wait a year and see. It's something that I hope remains a mystery. Um, so yeah. Okay, we have a little discussion going on here about how many Silmarils there were. Uh, one person is saying there are 3. Jackson is saying there were 7. I seem to remember there being 7 altogether. Um, you might be confusing the Silmarils with the Elven Rings, and those were 3. Um, but yeah, I seem to remember that there were 7 Silmarils altogether. So I'm gonna go with Jackson on that one. Again, yeah, it's been a while since I've read the Silmarillion. Um, I should reread that. So we've talked about the Arkenstone and the Silmarils quite enough. Okay, in 2850, Gandalf enters Dol Guldur and discovers that the Necromancer is Sauron, who he discovers that the Necromancer is Sauron at that point. Looking for the Rings of Power already, but he's still too weak. Yeah, I do seem to remember reading that in the appendices, where, yeah, it never says outright that Gandalf fought him, just that he discovered, or, and again, like, it's and again, we have this whole idea of Gandalf knowing everything even before he goes in. And this was a problem that I had in Fellowship too, because basically we have Gandalf touching the ring, seeing a flash of the Eye of Sauron, and rather than just realizing, okay, that's evidence enough, this is obviously the One Ring, he leaves the ring with Frodo, goes all the way to Minas Tirith, and does a whole bunch of research to try to find what is to try to find out whether or not what he just saw was actually the One Ring. And that it really creates like this weird juxtaposition with Gandalf knowing stuff, but still pursuing the evidence because he's not sure of him. He's not entirely sure, or he wants more evidence. And I think it would work. It would have worked much better if Gandalf had been less sure, or hadn't had all this evidence just thrown in his face so early that suddenly everything, suddenly, like, he has all this evidence, he has all this knowledge, this is obviously what this is, but because the story says so, he's still going to go off and do research, and he's still going to collect more evidence, even though he doesn't need to. He has all the evidence he needs. And so we have that same problem again here, with Gandalf knowing pretty much right off the bat that this necromancer in Dol Guldur is obviously Sauron. And I think even people who hadn't read the books or the appendices pretty much picked up on that right away in Unexpected Journey. Like, there was no mystery there. And that's kind of why I felt the big reveal of the necromancer as Sauron kind of, while it looks really cool, doesn't have the same kind of dramatic impact that they were going for. because we all pretty much knew at that point. Uh, so, uh, so we're kind of bouncing around here, but I want to talk about one last thing, um, which is Smaug. Now, there were many things about Smaug that I loved. Um, I thought his design was fantastic. I thought that I thought that the voice, I thought Benedict Cumberbatch's voice was incredible. The animation was fantastic. Um, Having said all of that, there were many things about Smaug that I didn't like or that didn't work very well. Uh, okay, Jackson is still talking about Silmarils. I'm gonna keep pushing ahead with Smaug because I don't want to get too bogged down in that because we can go back and forth on that forever. Um, uh, yeah. Okay. So with Smaug, um, there were a couple of things with Smaug that I didn't really like, and one of them is that he has all this knowledge about what is going on outside. Um, he knows that Sauron is coming to power. He says to Bilbo and to the dwarves, a dark power is rising. He knows what's going on. He also knows that Thorin now has the title Oakenshield, which, by the way, he did not have when he left Erebor. He earned that title later when he tried to retake Moria and fought Azog. And and so the question becomes, how does Smaug know all of this? And and I would have liked if we were going to have that there should have been some kind of window to show how he gets this knowledge. Is he in league with Sauron? Is there a Palantir hidden in Erebor somewhere that Smaug found? Um, we really don't know. All we know is that Smaug knows all this stuff that he shouldn't. Because I mean, aside from like he's in Erebor for all these years while all this other stuff is going on around outside. Now, it is possible that he came down from the north and took Erebor because he knew Sauron was coming back. That could have been a motivation. It's never clearly shown, but that still doesn't explain how he could know Thorin now has the name Oakenshield. Um, so clearly he has some sort of knowledge of the outside world coming in, which doesn't jibe with him being stuck, being in Erebor, and for the most part being asleep. Um, like once he takes Erebor and he takes all the gold, he pretty much just falls asleep and stays asleep. Um, let's see. I think that was to feed the fear that Smaug had connections with the wrong people, so to speak. It it's certainly possible, um, but again, to what end? I mean, is Smaug going to be used as a weapon? Uh, is Does he know this is coming, and so he's just trying to find a place to wait it out? And so he figured, hey, why not the Kingdom of Erebor? Um, all that stuff isn't explained, and really, I felt like uh, do you think Tauriel will die in the third movie, and that will be the reason for Legolas joining the Fellowship? Um, I do. I'll I will talk about that in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about Smaug. Um, now, I it's very hard for me to understand why Smaug would have all this knowledge, other than to use it to intimidate Bilbo and Thorin. And and if that's the only reason, like it does make Smaug a much more sinister type of character, and that I do like. Um, but it also didn't jibe with what should have been or what could have been. So Jackson is saying here that Smaug was rather weak compared to the full fire drakes. That's probably very true, because I believe Smaug is one of the last dragons to be in Middle Earth, and so maybe he gets knowledge that he he finds out that Sauron is coming back. He's going to create this big war, and he knows that he's the last of his kind. So he goes to Erebor to take it over and basically just wait it all out, since he's the last. Which actually makes him kind of a tragic character when you think about it. Um, but again, that's I don't even remember what I was talking about. So the Hobbit quite literally awakens the sleeping dragon. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. um, and there's another thing that people have been mentioning in the comments, which I haven't addressed yet, and that is how Smaug is able to compel Bilbo to take off the ring. And this was something I had a problem with, and I understand why they did it. Aesthetically, there were certainly ways they could have gotten around doing it this way, and basically, you want to see Smaug in all his glory without the filter of the shadow world that you would see if Bilbo was wearing the ring the entire time. That's a good point, Ustreamer70. Why does a dragon need to intimidate anyone? Um, that's a very good point. He's a freaking dragon, for God's sake. So another question is, how did Smaug survive the molten gold bath poured onto him with basically just pissing him off? Well, I mean, they don't really talk about it much in the movie, but Smaug actually has a very, very strong hide, and there was no way molten gold was ever going to stop him. And really, the dwarf should have known that. And I mean, you can chalk it up to Thorin being corrupted and not in his right mind because of the Arkenstone, but again, this all just led up to a very long, drawn-out, interesting to watch, but ultimately unnecessary action sequence because they gained nothing from doing it. All they did was make Smaug angry enough to leave and go to Lake Town. Eva says, I didn't like how they cut the Bilbo Smaug scene so many times. I agree. There was too much intercutting with that scene, and really the two of them together, Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch as Bilbo and Smaug, was so compelling and so well done and so well acted and such a great cat and mouse that I was like, whenever they would cut away from it, I'd be like, no, 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 go back to that. Go back to that amazing Bilbo and Smaug scene that we're having here. It should have been like the scene with Bilbo and Gollum. Yes, I agree. Well, yes, Ustreamer38. The part with Thorin on the Golden River seemed kind of stupid. How is it not hot? That's a good point. This is molten gold, and he's not exactly he's not exactly the doesn't have the strongest hide. I mean, he is a dwarf after all. But now here's another problem that I have, and this goes back to Unexpected Journey, and so with Unexpected Journey, with the flashback scene to Erebor in the beginning. And this is something that's bugged me since the beginning, is that dwarf technology for everything in Erebor is probably the most impractical technology I have ever seen in my life. You have these huge forges, these humongous vats of molten gold with these huge bellows that can only be pumped by a guy jumping on a chain and basically jumping up and down on it and doing nothing but that just to keep the fires going. That is completely impractical. And there was another scene in Unexpected Journey that always bugged me. What are you hoping is expanded on in the extended edition of DOS? I'll get to that. Well, in the original books, all it took for Smaug to rage on the lake town was the smell of the filthy lake men that lingered on Bilbo. You're absolutely right, Jackson. And I felt like that should have been motivation enough, especially if they had gone the original route, which is Bilbo building himself up and up and up and up and up until he finally just bellows out, "We're here for revenge," and then that's when Smaug is like, "Oh, you're with Lake Town and you want to take my stuff. Well, I'm not going to let you," and he goes off. And then you have that great last line that Bilbo says, which is, "What have we done?" It would have had an amazing impact right there. But again, we sort of went with the long drawn out action scene. Now I don't want to disparage it too much because I thought it was a very well done scene, like technically speaking. But I didn't feel it was all that necessary. I thought, yeah. So the other thing I was talking about is the impractical dwarf technology. And there's this one scene in Unexpected Journey in the flashback to Erebor in the beginning where they're showing Erebor at the height of its power. And there's this scene where this one dwarven smith with a gloved hand takes a golden ingot that is blazing hot, holds it up above his head, and two humongous hammers come down and smash it on both ends. And I saw that scene, and all I could think was, why on earth do they have that? What practical purpose can that possibly serve? Because there are about a million other ways you could have smashed that ingot that don't require two humongous hammers that come down, and you need to hold them up with your hand and pray to God that the ingot is still solid enough that the hammers won't smash your hand at the same time. Because gold is a very malleable metal, and if you heat it up, it turns to liquid. So I I had a real problem with that because it made no practical sense whatsoever. And I realize that's a nitpick, but it bugged me. Um, so, so yeah, I was never really sold on a dwarf technology. I feel like this, a lot of it was done just to look cool on screen. So, so yeah, that's I think I'm about done with my spoilers, my spoiler talk. Um, Sexy Hobbit had asked earlier what I'm hoping will be on the extended edition of Desolation of Smaug. Some of the things that I'm hoping for is more Beorn. I definitely want more Beorn in the extended edition. I want more Master of Lake Town too. I thought he was a really cool character, and there's a decent amount of him, but I feel like there's more there. Like I wanna learn more about this guy, like how he came to power, and why he has such a bad history with Bard. Like what happened between the two of them, and why is it when the Master hears about how people are talking about an election, he goes like he starts going off on a rant about who would dare defy me, and then he immediately thinks it must be Bard. What the hell happened between the two of them to cause this level of animosity? I want to know their backstory. Um, and how Alfred plays into all that. Other things I want to see. Well, there's this obvious moment where something was clearly cut, and we still haven't really talked about the barrel scene. Well, um, I mean, we could talk about the barrel scene. There isn't much to talk about other than it's a very long, drawn-out action scene. Uh, hot metal works like firm clay when it's glowing hot. Okay. Uh, I will accept. I I will defer to your knowledge on that, Jackson, since you would know more about it than I do. Um, but that still doesn't mean that the two hammers thing is any more practical. Um, Sexy Hobbit is saying, want more Tauriel and Keeley romance in the extended edition. Uh, I don't. I really don't. I think we got plenty. We don't need any more, and especially considering that it's probably going to end tragically. And uh, you streamer 062, sorry I got here late and missed Josh's answer on how Smaug knew Thorin's name. Tried to scroll up but couldn't find. Um, uh, yeah, I talked about that, and I'm not gonna go into it again. But I will put up a an archive of this episode once we're done, so you can go back and watch the whole thing and watch what you missed. Um, so don't worry. Um, I want Tariel to run off after Legolas in the extended. She is much better when fighting orcs. I agree. Tariel is totally kick-ass. And somebody mentioned a bomber scene in the barrel chase as being totally ridiculous. It was, but this is my own guilty pleasure here. I kind of loved it. It was so ridiculous and so over the top and so unexpected that I was like, I just need to go with this. This is too hilarious. um, how about the orc carrying mortal weapons? I must have missed that. Uh, Well, yeah, I mean, it's gonna. Here's my thing with Tariel. She is obviously going to be the catalyst that changes Legolas's opinion or his worldview from being isolationist to being more worldly, like he is in Fellowship of the Ring. And the best way to catalyze that is for her to die. And and so I have a feeling, I have a very strong feeling that we will see Tariel bite it in the next movie. Mortal weapons were only possessed by the Nazgul. That is, it was a mortal arrow that hit Keeley. He said it was mortal. I thought he said it was just poison. I could be wrong. If if that is the case and it was a mortal arrow, well then, yeah, that's just silly. Because yes, you're absolutely right. They can only be carried by the Nazgul, and I don't know if that's supposed to be like some sort of bit of evidence to show that they are indeed in league with Sauron, but you really don't need to do that. Uh, you know what? You're right. You're right. I am remembering it now. He does say he was hit with a mortal arrow. Um, yeah, you're absolutely right, Jackson. It was a mortal arrow. That's my mistake. It was not poison, and if it were poison, that would have worked much better. I guess I just assumed it was poison, and therefore missed that little line of dialogue. But Arwen healed Frodo. Actually, no, she didn't. It was Elrond who healed Frodo. Uh, with all the time Legolas spent with Aragorn and Gimli and Rohan, do you think Legolas might have mumbled Tauriel's name in his sleep? If he slept, we never see Legolas sleep. Think about that one. Actually, I'm just making that up. I have no idea. I'm sure he slept. um, and so a lot of people are talking about Tauriel's glow when she's healing Keeley. Um, and I always thought, I sort of pictured that glow being more of an hallucination on Keeley's part. Because it wasn't quite as ethereal as Arwen when she shows up in a Fellowship of the Ring. Because in Fellowship, when she shows up, she's wearing a completely different outfit. She is bathed in this ethereal light. Um, and in this one, Tauriel is simply just glowing. So, so I sort of saw that to be a delirious hallucination on Keeley's part. I could be wrong. Um, but so where are we now? We keep going back to Tariel, and yeah, I know there's plenty to talk about with Tariel, and but I was talking a little bit. Uh, I don't like what PJ did with Legolas in this film. He's too indifferent to me. For me, that actually worked because it makes him more his father's son. Because Thranduil is definitely somebody who very vehemently does not care about the rest of the world. Um, and it would make sense that Legolas would feel the same way, at least to me. So, all right, we have been talking about this movie for a good hour now. It's really time to wrap up the spoiler discussion because, believe it or not, there's actually more to talk about. Uh, um, So that's gonna do it for the spoiler discussion. Um, but we'll keep going in comments. You can post more on the Facebook page. You can message Torn Book Club on Facebook. You can email me at saruman at TheOneRing.net, and Saruman with two N's. We never mentioned Glowin's picture of Gimli. Well, I thought that was an unnecessary touch and would probably have been better suited to something in the extended edition, just because it's such a blatant callback to Lord of the Rings, and it's such a wink to the fans that I thought it might have worked better as something added into the extended edition. But that's just me. But so can you put that in chat so we can copy paste your email? Yes. Here, let me do that right now. There you go. So I'm Saruman with two N's at TheOneRing.net. And now we really do need to stop the spoiler discussion. So I'm going to remove the spoiler tag. And now we are back without spoilers. So so that was a good discussion. Went very long. There's clearly a lot to talk about, and there's clearly more to talk about that we haven't gone over yet. And it is something that we could talk for hours and hours about. I love that there is such a lively conversation going on here. But yeah, we only have so much time. So I apologize that we weren't able to get to everything. Maybe we can, if you email me some of the stuff you want me to address, I can take some time next week and go over that stuff. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about more, since this is a book club show, and for the last 2 weeks we've been talking about movies, I want to try to bring it back to books at least a little bit. And what I wanted to talk about was the idea of adaptation and what constitutes a good adaptation and what constitutes a bad one. And because certainly we've had many different opinions, particularly on Desolation of Smaug, as to whether or not this is a good adaptation, or a bad adaptation. And an argument can be made either way. I actually had this discussion with a friend of mine last night who was very angry with the movie. Like, he was very livid with it. He actually called it an abomination, which I think is very strong language for something like that. But that's his terms, not mine. And he was talking about all the ways that they could have done this to make it closer to the book and still make it an interesting and fast-paced, fun movie. And I'm like, I can't disagree with you on any one point, because adaptation is very subjective. Sometimes it can be done very well while straying from the book but keeping true to the spirit of it. And it can also be very poorly done by sticking too close to the book. And that was and it really is very subjective, and I got some flack from some fans by saying an adaptation is an interpretation and it's not going to be to everybody's liking. And And somebody said to me, well, what is there to interpret? You have all the plot points in the book. You just simply do that again. I'm like, well, that's just a very boring movie then. Because basically all you have is just a visualization of the book. And if you're doing just the plot points and there's no character development or anything, that's just a very dull, uninteresting movie. Um, and so yeah, it it makes for a very uninteresting movie if you're basically just regurgitating plot points. And for the most part, well, I mean, all the plot points from the book are in there. They're just greatly expanded upon, and a lot of stuff is added in for better or for worse. Um, sometime, Sometimes I thought it worked well, sometimes I didn't think it worked well, and we talked about all that in the spoilers. Um, but it was a basically what it comes down to is adaptation is interpretation, and one and why we have such strong emotional reactions to it when it's either really good or really bad. Uh, does anybody remember the 1977 animated version of The Hobbit? I think it was actually quite a good representation of the original. It was. Um, and that's what I said before. Like, if you want an adaptation of The Hobbit that is pretty much point for point uh, a plot mirror to the book, that already exists. Um, and quite frankly, if Peter Jackson had basically just done a point for point remake of the animated version, um, only with live actors and better special effects, I would not be all that interested in it. Like, I wanted to see something meatier, and we got something meatier. But again, that's just me. Um, so and like I just saw this review of a Russian version of The Hobbit that was done in 1985, and the production value, there were none. It looked terrible. Smaug was laughably bad, but you know what? It stayed true to the book. So, like, whether or not it's true to the source is just one aspect of an adaptation. There are many other things that go into it. And I wanted to go over what I consider to be some good adaptations and some bad adaptations, and why they are what they are. Like, for instance, I know, like, a lot of people have said Tolkien would never have approved of this, and Tolkien would have hated these movies, and you're absolutely right. Tolkien absolutely would have hated these movies. But that's the way he was. He had a very specific vision for Middle Earth. Um, um, and he was never satisfied with a lot of the interpretations of Middle Earth. He was known for being very critical of other artists who would attempt to draw images based on his works. I think I got something on the hotline here. Let's see here. Can you make Torn Book Club a podcast on iTunes? I would love to. I'm trying to see if we can do that. So what was I talking about? I get distracted so easily here, since it's just me. um, so as I was saying, Tolkien was very critical of anybody offering up their interpretation of his work, because it was it was a very personal thing for him, and he never understood why it was so popular, and he was never happy with other people going to Middle Earth because that was his world. And and so and if you want to make the argument that if the creator of the original doesn't like the adaptation, then that makes it a bad adaptation, then then that's really kind of a short-sighted way of looking at it, because um, I can give you another example of a movie adapted from an original, adapted from a book, where the author of the book hates the movie, and yet it is still a widely beloved movie, and that is The Shining, um, the Stanley Kubrick movie that was done in, I want to say, '76, maybe earlier than that. Um, and it was an adaptation of Stephen King's book. And Stephen King went on record very early on that he did not like this movie, that he thought this was a really poor representation of his vision and his story. And The Shining went on to become a horror classic that most people genuinely love. Uh, if you can find a copy of the very limited Solar Video VHS release of The Hobbit, you can see the Arkenstone scenes intact. You can also find them in the 1977 book that has the illustration done with the movie animation cells. I'm going to have to look that up, Jackson, because that sounds fascinating, and I do want to see if I can find an image of the Arkenstone from the 1977 Hobbit movie. Until today, I had no idea it was ever actually in there. Um, so I'm gonna have to look that up. So I was talking about how Stephen King hated The Shining. He hated the movie so much so that in the 90s he finally wrote his own screenplay, and they did a TV miniseries based on it. And holy God, was that a boring miniseries. If you've ever watched it, um, the only good thing about that miniseries is that it characterizes Jack Torrance in a very different way and in a much more sympathetic way. Other than that, like, me personally, I didn't like the book, I didn't like the Kubrick movie, I didn't like the miniseries. It's really not one of my favorite things in the world, but this is an example of how even when the author of the original doesn't like the adaptation of something, people still love the adaptation. And The Shining is probably the best example of that. So The Shining was 1980. Okay. Um, so to simply say that because Tolkien would not have liked these movies, that makes them a bad adaptation, is not a very strong argument, I feel. So, but what does make a good adaptation? Um, Again, like I said before, it doesn't necessarily need to be a point-for-point rehash of the plot. Um, for me, it needs to be something that keeps true to the spirit of the original work, um, or to keep true to the author's intent. Um, because writing just words on a page is a very different medium from visual storytelling in movies, and you can do a lot on with the written word that you could not possibly do in visual, such as interior monologue that goes on for pages and pages and pages and gives you all this insight into a character. In a movie, you have to convey that either through dialogue or through a look, and that's much harder to do. I agree that adaptation is up to interpretation, but don't you think there were things PJ could have done better? Absolutely, and I just spent an hour talking about it. uh, The characters appearing in his work are not from The Hobbit. Any resemblance to persons living or dead from the actual The Hobbit original novel is purely coincidental. um, that's pretty funny. um, no, I agree. There are definitely things that PJ could have done better or could have done differently. Um, as a whole, I still thought it worked as an excellent movie and an excellent movie-going experience. I enjoyed the hell out of it. Um, there were definitely things that I wish were done differently, and like I said, we just spent the last hour talking about that. Um, so, so as I was talking about adaptations that stay true to the spirit or the intent of the original, and it could be argued that The Desolation of Smaug strays from the intent of the original at this point. I can't disagree with that. But there's something else going on here because The Desolation of Smaug is not an isolated standalone movie. It's part of a much bigger, wider franchise at this point, and it needs to fit into that. Did it do a great job of fitting into it? Yes and no. There were parts I thought that worked very well. There were parts I thought didn't work very well. And I'm not going to argue against or defend people who or defend it against people who don't like it because your opinion is obviously very valid. Um, and I can't defend it against any argument saying that it wasn't a very faithful adaptation. It wasn't. It just plain wasn't. But it was still, um, as an overall experience, I still enjoyed it. And that's another part of adaptation that can contribute to whether or not it's a good or bad adaptation, and that is how does it act on its own? How is it as its own individual entity? And there's a very good reason why Tolkien himself would not have liked the adaptation. Tolkien was one of the most eminent linguists of our time. Absolutely, he was. Um, and that there's nobody better, really. There's nobody alive I know that comes close to Tolkien's linguistic ability. Um, and that's where Middle Earth came from. It came from him creating a world to fit these languages he was creating. And how and I it's a very interesting way to build a world, and that's another subject I'd like to talk about in another episode is the idea of world building in sci-fi and fantasy. Um, maybe not next week, but at some point. Generally, Tolkien didn't like the crazy fandom that his novels evoked, but then he's British, isn't he? Well, you know, I'm gonna have to tell you right now, Brits are some of the craziest fans I have ever met. Like more so than anybody else I know. All you have to do is just spend a day or two in Doctor Who fandom to know what I'm talking about. Um, so, I mean, Tolkien was definitely a stuffy guy. That's for sure. But let's not paint all of Brits in that same with that same brush because yeah, when there is a when you get Doctor Who going, Brits they got it all over us. Um, so uh, where I'm trying to get back to the idea of adaptation and what makes a good one and what makes a bad one. So I actually got a couple of articles. Hello, Ustreamer83. Welcome. You are new to this thing. Hopefully, I won't bore you. um, so I brought up some lists that I've got here of the 50 best and the 50 worst book to movie adaptations, and I'm gonna go through just a couple of them, because this really does sort of like run the gamut. Um, but some really good. Where am I? Some of the ones that qualify as like the best book to movie adaptations are things like No Country for Old Men or The Road, or both Cormac McCarthy books. Neither of which I've read, both of which I love the movies. But, they're very dark movies. One of the best ones they have up here is The Silence of the Lambs, uh, based on the book by Thomas Harris. That's a very dark movie, and it's a very dark book. And I felt that it worked. What did I miss here? Try the Sherlock fandom as well for Crazy Brits. Oh God, yes. And I'm a very active member in both those fandoms. So The Silence of the Lambs was also given a title of one of the better adaptation, or one of the best adaptations from a book to film. And I've read the book and I've seen the movie. I've read the book once. I've seen the movie multiple times, because it is one of my all-time favorite movies. It's very dark. It's very creepy. Um, but what it does so well, and what makes it such a good adaptation, it really comes down to Anthony Hopkins' performance as Hannibal Lecter. Um, a good example of greatly divergent book film adaptation is 2001: A Space Odyssey. That one was interesting because if I remember correctly, I could be wrong here, but I believe Arthur C. Clarke actually wrote the book in conjunction with the movie. Ustreamer50 is asking why is the club so early? I changed the time for it so that people overseas can watch it, because we're getting a lot more overseas fans, and um, I want them to be able to watch it live. And if it was still at 3 p.m., if it were on, it would be well into the wee hours of the morning over there, and so I want to give them a chance to be able to watch it live and contribute to the chat as well. So that's why I'm doing that. And so and Jackson is bringing up some bad adaptations, and you're right. Those are some bad adaptations, and I will get to them. Right now, we're talking about the good ones. So what I thought worked so well with Silence of the Lambs, and what made it such a good adaptation, was Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, because he was intensely creepy, and he brought this very sinister thing to it. He brought this very sinister aspect to that character and to the atmosphere of the movie overall. So yeah, that's what made it work for me pretty much more than anything else. I mean, other than that, it's also still a very solid movie and a solid adaptation, because once you get past the relationship between Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling, it's pretty much just a procedural. They're trying to hunt down a serial killer. There is the clock is ticking because he's kidnapped the mayor's daughter, and so they need to find him before he kills her. or it wasn't the governor's daughter. I don't remember. And and so like it, but it's still very much just a straight crime procedural. Once you take Hannibal and Clarice's relationship out of it, but it's Hannibal and Clarice's relationship that makes that story so strong, and that's why I really liked why I like that one. But I will say, and I'm going to bring it up here, probably one of my favorite all-time all-time adaptations is, and I use this as an example of a good adaptation, is Misery. Um, and as you can see, I talk a lot about Stephen King, and that's mostly because he's somebody I read a lot when I was younger, and he was one of the, during my more formative reading and writing years. Um, and Misery was probably the first book of his that I read, and I thought the movie did such an amazing job of taking this very simple, very atmospheric story of Paul Sheldon being held captive by his number one fan, and making it just so incredibly unsettling, and 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 that again really owes primarily to the performance of Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes. Um, okay, someone is asking, did you have fun at the Hobbit premiere? I did. I think Keely and Feely had more fun since they were actually there on the red black carpet. Um, but I still had a great time. Um, so I'm talking about Misery now, and I think that this is an example of a good adaptation because it does stray from the book in a number of ways. It The book takes place entirely in Annie Wilkes' house. We never see anything of the outside world. And in the movie, we do go into the outside world. We see the sheriff um, investigating the disappearance of Paul Sheldon, and it ultimately leads to him tracking him down and going to Annie's. Someone was talking about Legolas's eyes in The Hobbit and whether or not they were CG'd. They were probably enhanced. I don't know about CG. And I really couldn't say why. Some people have talked about, like, this is to show how different he is as a character, and that we'll see a transformation in his eyes as he transforms from an isolationist to a worldly character. That seems like a very weird touch to me. I'm not sure why that was done. They enhanced Orlando's eyes to fit with the description of elves. Okay, that I totally buy that. So anyway, I'm talking about Misery. So this movie does go beyond Annie's house, and it goes into the sheriff, who is actually a very likable character. I really like this guy, and he's not in the book at all. But that's an addition, and it worked for me because it kept true to the atmosphere of the book, and so and it still created a very creepy experience. Kathy Bates created an unbelievably memorable character in Annie Wilkes. So that's why I would call Misery a very good adaptation. So with the bad adaptations, there are quite a few here. And on this list we have The Golden Compass, which, yes, that was pretty bad. Let's see here. Well, almost anything Dr. Seuss related over the last 10 years is just bad. What else have we got here? A lot of these are kids' movies. A lot of these are video game adaptations, usually done by Uwe Boll, who is, like, he's pretty much a punchline at this point, so he's not even worth bringing up. Let's see, what other bad ones are there here? Uh, let's get up to the top of the list here. We got, yeah, Thunderbirds, Catwoman. A lot of these are just franchises now, and I don't think the Lorax rocked. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to disagree with you there, Jackson. I found the Lorax the movie intolerable. I thought the songs were awful. I thought it took what was already a very heavy-handed environmental message in the book and just amped it up 10 times more and made it so much more over the top. Um, I I did not like I did not like the Lorax at all. um, so, what are some other bad adaptations? Jackson, earlier you had mentioned I think Ender's Game, and again that is another absolutely terrible adaptation. And Ender's Game, all my personal feelings towards Orson Scott Card aside, Ender's Game is still one of my favorite books. And I've been looking forward to a movie based on this book for a very long time. Uh, does anyone here like a Song of Ice and Fire or the TV series Game of Thrones? I do. I like both. Um, what is the new book club time? It is at 12 o'clock Pacific time now. As you can see, we've been going for almost 2 hours at this point. And I love Game of Thrones. I love Song of Ice and Fire. That is another example of a great adaptation. Even though it goes, it tends to go far afield sometimes, but it also goes back, and it stays very, very true to the spirit of the books, along particularly with the "we're going to freaking kill everybody" aspect of it. Uh, so, so Ender's Game. Uh, I I love the book, and I wanted to see a movie based on it for a very long time. Uh, but it didn't. It didn't really work for me because what this movie did was it just regurgitated plot points, and this is goes back to uh, just doing plot points does not necessarily make an adaptation good, because what the movie of Ender's Game does is it just goes over the plot points and removes all the character from it. Um, and so what you have is a very empty and hollow experience. And all the emotional impact is lost, all the emotional connection to Ender or to Valentine or to Bean or to anybody is lost. And so basically, Ender's Game to me was just a very empty, hollow movie um, that didn't do the original book any justice whatsoever. And so I did not particularly care for Ender's Game. And Sexy Hobbit is asking, what about True Blood? I think it's better than the books. I can't really speak to that because I have I've only seen the show. I haven't read the books, so I'm not going to really comment on that. Um, how old do you have to be to read Game of Thrones? Oh, you'd have to at least be in your teens, I would say. It's a very tense, very graphic book. Speaking of adaptations, how did you like Mists of Avalon, both the book and the movie? Um, this is where I have to confess I have neither read that book nor seen the miniseries based on it. It's one of those books that I plan to remedy, and maybe I'll make it a book of the month just to kick my own butt into gear and read it. Um, Hitchhiker's Guide movie with Zoe Deschanel was nowhere near the original. BBC adaptation was very good. Used the same cast as the radio. It did, and I liked the Hitchhiker's Guide movie, um, but I didn't like Zoe Deschanel. Because quite frankly, and this is my own personal um, opinion about Zoe Deschanel, is that she strikes me as an alien who doesn't understand human emotion. And so whenever she has to act in any way that is beyond this very narrow range that she's capable of doing, she suddenly becomes very awkward, and it seems like she has no idea what she's doing. Um, like, for instance, in the Hitchhiker's movie, when she discovers that Zaphod was the one who signed the order to destroy Earth, and she's supposed to flip out on him, uh, she seemed more like she was like upset because he backed his car into hers or something like that. Like, it was this very, very weird, awkward scene where she was nowhere near as angry as she should have been in that moment. Uh, okay, bye, Tolkien fanatic. Uh, well, definitely back. Um, you're very welcome, and I'm sorry that you have to leave. I should probably get going soon too, but I want to talk very quickly about bad adaptations again. As I said, I used Misery as an example of a good adaptation, and I'm going to use another example of what I consider to be one of the worst adaptations I have ever seen in my life. And this is something that I know a lot of people get very, very angry over. uh, do you think Peter Jackson, There and Back Again, The Battle of Five Armies will be epic? If it's not, then I'm going to be very disappointed. um, so here's an adaptation. It's not based on a book. Um, it's based on a TV show. And this is one of those adaptations that when you just mention it, gets such a vitriolic and angry response from the fans of the original, and rightly so. And it is The Last Airbender. This was far and away not just a bad adaptation, but a bad movie. Um, like, and I actually saw the movie before I watched the TV show, and so just watching the movie on its own with no basis for anything, um, it was just boring and weird and didn't seem to go anywhere and was completely out of nowhere. It it made no sense. The characters were dull, uh, and then I finally watched the TV show, and I would say after about 3 episodes, I started getting angry at the movie. I'm like, where was all this? All this amazing character and all these incredible colors and designs, all this wonderful dialogue. Where was this in this movie? It was nowhere to be found. And and that's when I realized why so many people were angry at this movie, because it really is a terrible interpretation of a really amazing TV series. Um, and this movie was, I tried watching it again after having watched the TV show, and I could not get through it. It's that bad. So what is it about this adaptation that doesn't work? Um, it removes all the heart from the characters. It takes all the comedy, throws it completely out the window. It arbitrarily changes. Um, it arbitrarily changes a lot of the cultural um, backgrounds of the characters, such particularly with the Fire Nation. in the animated series, the Fire Nation is very Japanese, and in the movie, they're Indian. Um, so I haven't watched the series yet because I'm afraid it's going to be childish. Is it? It kind of starts off that way. Um, uh, there are definitely childlike aspects to it, and I would call it more childlike than childish because it doesn't shy away from the deeper and more powerful themes as it goes on. Um, there is a lot of slapstick, and it is something you're either going to like or you're not going to like. Um, I it took me a little while to get into it, but they develop the characters so well. If you just stick with it, you'll find yourself liking it too. Um, what what's your opinion about Desolation? What's your favorite part? We've been talking. I talked about that for an hour already. But I'd have to say my favorite part of Desolation um, is probably the dialogue between Smaug and Bilbo. Um, all other stuff aside, that was amazing. Uh, so yeah, the last Airbender um, really it just removed all of what made the TV show uh, so charming and so fun, and replaced it with this very dull, melodramatic story that meandered, went off on tangents, didn't seem to go anywhere, and there was no emotional connection to anybody or anything. Um, and so, yeah, this is what I would call a bad adaptation. Um, and and what makes for a bad adaptation is not just whether or not it can do that, whether or not it can stay true to the original. Um, it's also whether or not it makes its own unique self uh, self-inclusive experience that is worthwhile. Um, and Last Airbender does not do that. Ender's Game does not do that. Um, so yeah, for me, that's what qualifies a good and bad adaptation. Now, I'm we're way past the we're past the 2 hour mark on this thing, so we're gonna have to cut it short soon. Um, but I do want to say one last thing about adaptations, and this is my own personal opinion. As much as I love Peter Jackson's movies, they are not my favorite Tolkien adaptation. Um, and I would like to just leave you with what I consider to be my favorite adaptation of Tolkien, and that is a 1981 audio drama that was done by the BBC. That is a 13-hour adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. It stars Ian Holm as Frodo. It stars Ian McShane as Aragorn, um, and it is still to this day just an amazingly compelling compelling story. It captures your imagination. It brings you into Middle Earth, and it's done very well by by everybody. It's very minimalist. Um, okay, just wondering opinions on Narnia series adaptations. Uh, I, I, I liked Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for the most part. Thought Prince Caspian was kind of and I still have never seen Dawn Treader, so I really can't speak to that. Uh, Ustreamer82 is asking about Cumberbatch and whether or not he was cast well. I think he was. Yes. um, but so I'm just going to leave you with the audio drama of The Lord of the Rings from 1981. Still my all-time favorite Tolkien adaptation. As much as I love PJ's work, it still does not. It doesn't quite capture the magic that I felt reading the books as much as this audio drama does. And I'm going to leave it at that. So I'd like to close this out since we are now at 2:18. We've been talking for a really long time here. I want to thank you all for joining in this very lively discussion about the desolation of Smaug and about adaptations. There are many things that I wished I could have gotten more into. Even with 2 hours, there wasn't enough time to get into everything. All of you, feel free to stick around the chat and keep talking. I'm going to have to sign off now, but thank you all so much. Sexy Hobbit, Jackson Murdered It, I Stole the One Ring, Eva, everybody, thank you for all your contributions to this discussion. And like I said before, we've changed the time of this show to 12 p.m. as opposed to 3 p.m. in order to better accommodate our friends overseas. Where can we find the BBC 1981 LOTR? It is available at audible.com. It's broken up into 3 parts. It's broken up into Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King. But it's all available there. You probably need to look for Lord of the Rings under audio drama, and there's a couple different versions down there. If I can find a link to the actual one, I'll post that on the Facebook page. But I have seen it up there. So I'm going to sign off, and thank you again all so much for this lively discussion. Let me just put up our contact information. Remember that we're on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/tornbookclub, that's kind of our central hub right now with all of our updates for what you can expect, links to the stuff that we talk about. And we're also on Twitter, but I don't use it that much. And as always, you can email me, Saruman with 2 N's at TheOneRing.net. And please, if there were many things that people were talking about in the chat that I didn't get a chance to get to this week, so anything you have that you want to that you want me to talk about next week, email it to me, and I will try to address it next week. So thank you again so much, and I will see you all next week.